very much. Thanks for the opportunity. First of all, in 2006, we were in a process where government, or shall I say Maria Ramos at the time, wanted to split Transnet and take away all the non-freight rail core organizations. And we then agreed in principle that Passenger Rail South Africa will move and become an entity on its own. However, government has failed us in totality. Because first of all, the corruption has killed Passenger Rail South Africa to the extent that just before the lockdown, because of the corruption, there was a decision that they get rid of all the security personnel. That left, obviously, the targets for the criminals to really destroy what was left of Passenger Rail South Africa. Now, if you look from a business perspective and you look around the world, your local train operations, passenger train operations, are not profitable. They're subsidized by governments or metropolitan councils, etc.
Yeah.
Now, the question that we ask, which businessman would consider putting billions into a black hole?
Yes.
Because if you just take the two corner or two key rail lines that they are wanting to get up and running, which is the Central Line in Cape Town, which carries millions of passengers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got informal settlements that have now staying on the rail line.
Yes.
So you've got to get rid of those people first, and you know that's not a overnight process.
Mm.
And then you sit with a situation that you've got to rebuild that whole line, and you've got to decide: are you going to put a wall up? How are you going to ensure that your assets are protected from criminal elements?
Yes.
Now, I don't see a businessman coming along and putting 10 billion in there, because at the end of the day, any businessman that puts 10 billion in is expecting to have a return of at least 5%, 7%, or even 12% for that matter. And he's not going to get that sort of return whatsoever with the current state of the passenger rail assets as they are. I mean, I was listening to the PRASA Accounting Authority speaking to the Parliament Committee yesterday, where he was saying that, it's going to take quite a long time to do exactly that. However, they're looking at short term of trying to get the informal settlements off the rail line and then running diesels in the interim on both the lines.
Mm.
You understand what I'm saying to you?
Yeah.
So it just shows you that even from a governmental perspective, they are battling. And the sad part about it, and this is what we've said from day one, and that's why we went on the Section 77 strike last year, or protest action last year, where we had called on government to get involved, show political will, that you are really truly interested to save Passenger Rail South Africa and ensure that the poorest of the poor have a reliable, safe transport system to get to work and back. And unfortunately, that's not happening. If you look at business coming in, you most probably find if they are convinced to put money in, you'll find yourself a very similar system as to the Gautrain.
Mm.
And if you're going to have a look at the Gautrain, the cost to use that train is in actual fact for middle class and upper class.
Mm.
The poorest of the poor can't afford to use that train.
Okay,
So,
Steve,
so that is the situation we find ourselves in. It's on that basis we are saying it's not feasible. Government must take the responsibility, and we must just find a collaborative way to deal with it and get PRASA back on its feet.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions for you. The first one being that if we had to look, do we not really need to change our mindset around how commuter rail is actually used? I mean, you say poorest of the poor, everybody says poorest of the poor, yet around the world, citizens of the countries use their railway system, whether they are school children, university, work in a manufacturing facility, work in an office. And I think part of that reason is because their rail network and the investment that those countries have put into their rail network means that they have trains where people live going to places where people work. And I think our network, or certainly the passenger rail PRASA network in South Africa, hasn't grown with the times, if I can put it like that. Surely there is a better way for us to accommodate all people of South Africa making use of public transport and specifically rail.
No, sure, I agree with you. I mean, if you just look at what's happened over the period of time, and you take Cape Town for argument's sake, we all know that a lot of people work in the center of Cape Town. So if there was a reliable, safe service, I'm sure I would, as a working person, would rather take the train if it was safe and reliable and to get to work than using my vehicle to get to work.
Yes.
But this is the problem where we are faced with the criminal elements that we are finding and what's happening on the system. If we can get that right, and that's why I say you need a collaborative will from government where you have all the departments working together, and that's why we called on the President to say, bring in the South African Defence Force. The South African Defence Force that we viewed was only to be there to patrol the lines and protect the assets.
Yes.
You understand what I'm saying? For the interim. Now, if we had done that last year already, we wouldn't have had the disaster we're sitting with today. That we would have been in a better position to be able to have revived the service than we sit with today.
Okay. So do you really think that the private sector cannot play a role here? If we're saying predictable, safe, reliable, these are the key aspects of passenger rail transport anywhere in the world. Most countries around the world do have private operators running their network because they are really good at being safe, reliable, and predictable.
It is our knowledge that the majority of the train systems are not privately owned. They run either by the metropolitans or they run by the government, and they're subsidized by government. Our biggest problem that we also find within PRASA is government, when they took over the responsibility and decided to split Transnet and Passenger Rail South Africa, they did not ensure and did not look at the subsidy that is required, and they have not increased the subsidy year on year in comparison with what is required to ensure that your service is able to be run on that particular issue. I mean, if you just look at the PRASA system that we have today, you can't even ensure that passengers are paying because it's so easy to get into a train. It's an open network. So, you can walk from wherever you want to, walk onto the actual train station and get into the train, and there's no one in the train, basically, that checks your tickets. So, everyone is riding for nothing. So, and we've said this to government. Then if that is the fact and you don't want to spend that money, then you must ensure that you spend money to make sure it's reliable, free, and it's safe.
Yes.
If you want to ensure that people must pay, well, then we got to, unfortunately, in this country, look at other ways of ensuring that it's a closed network similar to the GO train.
Yes.
And that's going to cost billions, and it's going to take time.
And is that not necessarily where the role of the private sector could come in? Is that? Do you see a way for private sector to participate in improving?
The private sector can come in to build and to assist with getting the infrastructure up and running. But I do not foresee that the private sector will put in R1 billion or 10 billion rand to come and invest and say, yes, I want to be part and parcel of this, whilst there's no political will specifically currently in this whole situation that we find ourselves. Because, as I say again, business people, they want return on their money. Yes. Let's be frank with each other. And I'm going to invest in any particular project, and I can't be guaranteed of my return on my money. Why would I invest?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, Steve, one more question for you. Given the current state of PRASA, as it is right now, where we have overhead lines that are not working, we have lines that are not even open, is it worthwhile even operating PRASA right now? Should we not just close it down and then figure out a new way and start from scratch?
Well, you can operate, and that's why we've used the alternative. Yet again, unfortunately, this is where the politicians don't want to take advice from us as Labour. When it comes to these things, we ask them to sit down with us and we can come up with proposals. Fortunately, they did take our proposals seriously, and they're running diesels now. It's more expensive, but your chances of running a diesel at a more predictable time period is greater than you would even bother to get signals up and running and to get overheads up and running and to get substations up and running. So the short term, yes, they have taken heed and they're now renting diesels from Transnet in the short term, and that's the only way we're going to get PRASA up and running for the short term. The long term, well, unfortunately, the long term, you'll have to look at first safeguarding the process. And let's be frank, the 3,100 security personnel which they are in the process of employing is not going to suffice, because first of all, those people have not been trained. They haven't got arms with them. I mean, let's be frank, if you're out there in the dark or on a station where 200 people are threatening your life and you're sitting with a baton, what's going to happen? I'm going to run.
Yeah.
Because it's my life that's at stake. And that's the unfortunate part that we sit with. So, yes, it's a good start to bring in the 3,100 people, because then they work under your own conditions. But I don't think that's going to suffice, although we're waiting for a presentation from General Rakau, which is responsible for the security, and only once he's made the presentation to us, we will be able to see whether the plan that he's putting on the table has some merit and can assist going a long way. And we mustn't forget that we had a discussion with the CE from Freight Rail the other day, and this same element, the criminal element, is hampering even the freight environment.
Yes.
To such an extent that they have now upped their security in certain key areas where the criminal element is quite heavy along the central, when I say the central line, it's the Durban-Johannesburg line, which is key at this point in time for your containers, etc.
Yeah.
And she indicated to us, if they don't do that, it's disastrous. So, and this is why we keep on saying we need a collaborative process and integrated discussion, so that we can look at all avenues and get all the security people on board, that we can safeguard our rail network. Because let's not fool ourselves, rail is the cheapest mode of transport.
Yes.
And if we're not going to stick and get that working for this country, it's only the consumer that's going to pay the brunt and the excess cost, because everything is running by road.
Yeah.
And that's the problem we're faced with.
I'm assuming that UNTU is happy with the idea of third-party open access for private operators on Transnet's core network.
On Transnet itself, if there are lines that are not used, we've discussed this on numerous occasions. There was requests put out for operators to run lines that are not used at the current moment. And there was very little interest shown at that point in time because of the vast costs for that operator. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Once again, that operator will either have to go and purchase a locomotive or locomotives, trucks for that matter, depending what he or she is going to run on that particular line. Then you look at the cost element and first of all, what is left of those railway lines, someone will have to first repair those railway lines. And the question is government going to do it? Government hasn't got the money at this point in time.
Yeah.
Will the private person that is interested in running that line, is he going to pay the cost to upgrade that line so it's usable? Again, he'll have to go and make thumbs and say, well, if I'm going to put 10 billion in there, will I get my return on my investment? And that's the question that remains unanswered at this point in time. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we had little interest shown in the first rounds in the mid-2000s, when they started making these lines available for private partnerships to be used.
Yeah, so my concern is that it's taken a really long time. So in the 2000s, I think was actually the second attempt to gather interest in branch line concessions. But the bottom line is that type of investment into fixing the infrastructure for such a short connection is kind of null and void if you don't have access to the core network in order to service a broader market, and certainly the market that Transnet is not currently servicing. So I think there is good opportunity for the sector as a whole by having third-party access available to the core network for private operators.
Yeah, I listen to what you are saying, but I'm not convinced. If they had to somehow find a way, like building a connection at the crossroads where the parties connect, and Transnet then hook their commodities with them and take it along, yes, then one can look at it. But as the rail line is currently utilized in specifically your volume lines, specifically, and I'm referring here to your iron ore line.
Yeah.
Your line that runs from Postmasburg through the Free State to with manganese. Your coal line. It's already using up all its spare capacity with the volumes that it's carrying.
Yeah.
So and the same with the Durban line. It's got very scarce spare capacity at this point in time. Specifically, if you take into cognizance if everything is normal. And when I say everything is normal, that there's no speed restrictions on those lines, there's no theft taking place on the cables. Trains can move from point A to point B at the normal speed, and you can deliver from point A to point B on time.
Yeah.
If all those elements are taken care of, yes, then possibly I agree with you. But then you've got to find a way of how to hook, how do you get them into the network, but to put them on the mainline network and give them authority to use the mainline network, I don't think there's space at this point in time with the volumes that are carried.
Okay, well that's interesting. I mean, I hadn't taken that into consideration of what their current capacity is. Steve, thank you very much for your time, and I'm sure we will chat soon.
All right, pleasure. Thanks.